Welcome back and thank you for joining us on the Polity this afternoon. If you are wondering why I'm smiling, it's because our MCL guys are doing a great job. Of course, they always make me laugh. Joining us now to my right is Etaba Agbo, a legal practitioner, of course, to do justice to our topic today. Welcome to the studio.
Thank you very much.
And of course, to my left is none other than Ejiro. Welcome to the studio, a lecturer. I don't know which they would use, but then I think I'll just stick to lecturer today.
It's fine.
How are you? It's been a long time.
Yeah, I've been around.
How is Nigeria treating you?
Fairly.
Yeah. Okay, like someone would say, endurance is our second name. So since you said fairly, we'll just stick to that. Then, of course, today we'll be talking about the Supreme Court's verdict, and there are lots of questions on everybody's mind. But notwithstanding, we'll ask some few questions, and later on we'll take, of course, everybody's call to hear their own opinion about what has happened today. But then before we go deep into that, I'd like us to start with the legal practitioner. I'd just like to get his general overview about the Supreme Court before I start asking my questions. So Etaba Agbo, how are you before I go into and yes, before I forget, today is his birthday, so it's good to say happy birthday to you.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you.
And we would not like to enter the new year with violence, would we?
Well, I hope that our conversation does not introduce us to too much violence.
So much violence. Okay, we'll think about that. But then I'd like to get your general overview about today's verdict in court. Of course, we know there are some persons that would be beaten. Of course, we can only have one winner at the end of the day, which is President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. What's your general overview on this?
Well, let me say that first on my impression about the judgment. I think once again the judgment reminds us. The judgment reminds us of the fact that the Supreme Court is the court of final instance. Final instance to the extent that once the Supreme Court gives a judgment on issues, of course that judgment is final. And as our learned jurists in the well-decided cases have told us, that the Supreme Court is final not because it is infallible, but because it is final. And of course, the finality of the decision of the Supreme Court is well established under Section 235 of the Nigerian Constitution. But beyond the finality of the decision of the Supreme Court, I think the judgment is one that is going to set huge precedents for our electioneering process. Particularly when you look at some of the issues that were raised before the Supreme Court, issues like 25% from the FCT as provided under the provision of our Constitution, I think Section 134 of the Constitution. So that judgment is going to set the ball rolling on issues like that, and then on other issues too that were presented before the Supreme Court. It is fortunate and both unfortunate, because for a matter that is before the court, there's always expected that there should be a winner. And so President Bola Ahmed Tinubu must have gotten a judicial stamp on his presidential ambition and of course his presidency. And for the appellants, that's the PDP and the Labour Party, the judgment didn't go in their favor. But I think that's why it is a judicial process. There must be an end to litigation. So currently we have an end to litigation as long as the 2023 elections are concerned. Yes.
All right, speaking about end to litigations, we have a video of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu addressing some of his staffs, telling them that their job is secure. Let's take a look at that video before we delve deep into today's polity.
Thank you, sir.
Congratulations, Your Excellency. Your job is secured. Stop too. Your job is secured.
Congratulations, Your Excellency. Gentlemen, congratulations to the President. Having been confirmed by the Supreme Court as the 5-star general. Yes. As the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Thank you. Congratulations, Your Excellencies. Thank you very much. Congratulations.
Thank you. Amen. All our renewal shall come to manifestation. All your job is secured.
Let the President breathe.
Let the President breathe.
Welcome back. Well, of course, those people know that their jobs are safe, but the question is Nigeria safe under this said administration? And now I would like to ask one question to Ejiro Onuata. What is your own perception about the general verdict? Of course, whatever we say right now cannot overturn or overrule what the lordships they've said.
Well, Mercy, for me, I think it is time for the CSO to get to work,
Okay.
and the National Assembly as well, because there are some gray areas that we need to revisit. The Constitution needs to be amended, because the issue of declaring a winner before you declare a winner, then the next minute we are now going through court process while you have this person on the seat. I think it's not proper. We should really look into that. And the issue of INEC as well, we have to look at this electronic collection of results, displaying the result, because what INEC told us was different from what we saw. So we need to really look at the Constitution, to amend the Constitution to make it electronically. All right. Yes, there are issues of areas where there are not networks and all that. You can like what we are told, that you can actually upload these things when you get to where there's network. It can it will go through. So I think we need to look at these gray areas. Then another area we need to look at is, I don't know if they really have the constitutional power to make this happen, but the issue of selling of nomination forms, that it has to do with the political parties. Now, why do I want us to look at that? Because you see, when you put pressure on the system itself is doesn't really favor the individuals who want to really contest. That's why you see they spend a whole lot to get to power, and these guys are not Father Christmas. When they get to power, obviously they want to recoup. That is why we have the issue of, you want to give them a SUV of 130 million, and it's quite sad. Some persons are really sad, because even those who rode on the fame of Peter Obi to power are not even rejecting this offer.
That's even after the party has said most of them should reject.
What does that
and
tell
then
you?
The silence actually speaks a lot. That's what some persons have said. The silence
tells you that politicians are united. The followers ought to be united as well, because you see people fighting over, oh, this is my man, I'm for this guy, I'm for this party. At the end of the day, I'm sorry to say, but they are there for their own self-interest first. You understand? So we need to start looking at these things. And I wouldn't blame these guys. I wouldn't blame the politicians, because you spend a whole lot to get into power. Of course, you have to recoup. The system does not really give you the chance. The system does not favor you. So I think we need to start looking at this gray area so that we can have a very smooth election. Okay,
all right. Now, my question to you, legal practitioner in the house, he has said something about SUVs, of course, but then there's been plenty of questions surrounding these SUVs. Of course, they've said, oh, we've approved SUVs to certain persons, and then a particular party has come out to say our party members should reject, and the party members have, of course, kept quiet. Then now that they've asked them that, why do you guys need these SUVs? They've said because of bad roads, which is laughable if you ask me. But then the question is, whose job is it to fix these bad roads that you are claiming you are protecting yourself against?
Thank you very much. Now, the controversy surrounding these SUVs and the comments generated from lawmakers, they are totally laughable, very laughable. Laughable because I feel like some of these lawmakers have lost touch with the reality of what is happening in Nigeria, in a country where the cost of living has gone so high because of some of the policies that have been introduced in recent times. We now have lawmakers who should be in a position where they should be able to play their legislative role in terms of acting as checks on the executive arm, so that they can implement these policies in a way that it does not in any way cause hardship to the people. People are suffering, while the lawmakers who are supposed to be the watchdog over the executives are busy making moves to get SUVs for themselves. It tells you a whole lot about what our Nigerian system has become and what the concept of leadership in Nigeria is all about. It looks more like leadership in Nigeria is all about the comfort of the elitists, the political class, and not necessarily how it affects the Nigerians in totality. So, first, I have said it is laughable. Laughable because given the circumstances that we find ourselves at this current stage of our national life, the last thing any serious leader in Nigeria should be thinking of shouldn't be an SUV. It should rather be how to create an enabling platform where Nigerians can have access to basic needs when they wake up in the morning, and not seeking to give yourself an aggrandizement that you already have. It's still on record that the lawmakers in Nigeria, they are one of the highest paid in the world. Highest paid. These are the same persons who are now jostling to go and get SUVs to add to so much wealth that they already have by virtue of the salaries at the end. So when they begin to also tell us that it's because of bad roads, that is why they are looking for SUVs, you also ask yourself, are they in any way, are they in a position to be able to influence decisions around construction of roads?
And most of them have been in that office for long, not as if they are just new people that just came on board.
These are the issues.
That are over 8 years in that seat.
Yeah, so you are in a position where you have the power, so to speak, to summon anybody who is responsible for a bad road to come and explain why this road has not been constructed. You are leaving that responsibility. You've not performed that role that the constitution gives you as a lawmaker. And you're now using your inability to carry out your duties as an excuse to begin to amass wealth and gain certain benefits that you think they accrue to you. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't at all. Because if anybody has what the heart of a leader should be, you should understand that Nigerians now wake up and they're living their lives on a budget that is over times 3%, over 3 times what they used to earn some months back. And so that alone should give you cause to worry every day that you go to work as a leader, to see how policies can be put in place, and if you have an opportunity to checkmate the activities of the person who is responsible for those policies, you call those persons to question and ensure that they begin to take drastic measures to ensure these policies are revisited so that the life becomes more bearable for Nigeria. But we are in Nigeria, we are not having any of that. We are rather hearing SUVs because they are bad roads. Is it me who is a common Nigerian, if I may use that phrase, a common Nigerian who is not a lawmaker? I'm not an office holder per se, but a Nigerian citizen. Is it me who can construct the roads for them to use them? So if let's assume now that those SUVs, they buy them for them. They buy the SUVs, so they will use them and drive comfortably on the bad roads they are complaining about. Where is the shame in bad leadership?
Speaking about that, what's your general review?
Well, in any case, how many of these guys travel via road? That's the
big question.
Because
big question, yeah.
In most cases, they fly by air and then tell the driver, go wait for me at the airport. All right? So you're telling us that you need an SUV because of bad road. I mean, it's shameful. How did we even get to this stage? It's quite shameful. You see, over the weekend, I was in Benue State, Makurdi, and the road from Abuja to Makurdi is quite smooth. Excellent. All right? And in my mind, I was thinking like, I wish we have this kind of road that leads to maybe somewhere in the east, maybe Onitsha, Port Harcourt or Warri, you know, because we discovered that a lot of persons go to these places to get goods and come back to. So it will ease the ease of doing business. All right? Why not concentrate on some of these roads that really need attention? Okay? These monies you want to put into buying SUVs, use it to fix the road. I think that is my own view on this. Okay,
all right. Let's quickly deviate back to Supreme Court, and I'd like to quote what His Lordship has said. A legal practitioner is laughing. It looks like he wants to bolt out of the studio. But then, let's quickly take this two, and I'd like you to answer the questions in one breath. The first one is said, Supreme Court dismisses PDP application to bring new evidence. Of course, we know that the appellate court is where you can put down all your evidences. That's one. Supreme Court lacked jurisdiction to admit PDP's new evidence. Can you explain what this means in one breath?
Well, I think these issues are around the question of whether the Supreme Court has powers to admit new evidence. And if you ask me that question, I think from my point of view, I hold the view that the Supreme Court has the powers to admit new evidence. Of course, when you look at the rules, the Supreme Court rules that governs proceedings before the Supreme Court, or there are two of those rules, particularly Rule 12, sub 1 of that rule allows the Supreme Court to admit new evidence, where of course the party who is seeking to produce the new evidence for the Supreme Court does so by leave of court, and of course by going, when you're seeking for this leave to produce a new evidence, motion, affidavit, and all of that. So legally speaking, if you ask the question, do they have the power? Of course they do. I submit that yes, they do, because the rules of that court allows the Supreme Court to admit new evidence. So when these issues come up, one will naturally expect that of course, given the circumstances that we find ourselves, these rules should be applied in a way that justice should be seen to be done. And justice should not be just be justice to one person, but it should be justice to everybody, including the Nigerian people. But I mean, as a legal practitioner, I'm careful to know the fact that the Supreme Court is final. And like our learned jurists have told us in decided cases that the Supreme Court is final, not because it is infallible.
Okay, yeah, the Supreme Court is final. We agree with that. But do you think the Supreme Court is working under the directive of the president?
Well, to think that the Supreme Court is working under the directive of the president will mean that there is no separation of power in the Nigerian constitution.
Oh, wow, that's smart.
So when you look at the constitutional provisions, you see from section 3, 4, 5 clearly provides for governmental powers in Nigeria, legislative, judicial, and executive.
Yeah.
So there's that, 4, 5, 6. There's that clear division of powers under the Nigerian constitution. So beyond what is in the constitution, the reality is always with what happens in practice.
In practice, that's correct.
It is because of issues like this that there's been a long-standing advocacy on the independence of the judiciary.
But do you even think anything that we term independent or the supposedly independence in Nigeria, do you think that word actually comes to play? Because like people would always say, we sign lots of MOUs, the problem is always the implementation. Yes. So now it's an independent body. Do you actually think that word, that term would actually come to play in Nigeria?
Now, the independence is not even there. That's why there's advocacy that we should have the independence of the judiciary. Okay. And the advocacy for the independence of the judiciary stems from the fact that in terms of the appointment process, in terms of remuneration for judges, there should be an independent body that is responsible for most of these things, because it's only natural that when you subject the appointment of the judicial officer to the executive arm, the executive, the NJC will nominate, the president will appoint, subject to ratification by the Senate. There's that level of interference by the executive. And so one would naturally expect that even in the course of justice dispensation, you may want to dance to that phrase that they say, he who pays the piper.
Let's see. I think who appoints the CJN?
But that's what we are saying. The NJC recommends to the president, and the president appoints subject to ratification by the Senate. So in reality, too, these are part of the issues.
Just like who appoints the INEC chairman. So these are issues we really need to look into. Moving forward, you know, I think the INEC chairman should be appointed by either the legislature. They should come together.
But why not even elected?
Elected will be
whether we like it or not, when you talk about being appointed, you are still answerable to someone. Because when we actually analyzed something last week about the EFCC chairman coming out to say the anti-graft war should start from the National Assembly, and some persons have said it's easier said than done. When you get into the office and your hands are cuffed, because yes, you are an appointed person, and then of course you know you are answerable to someone. What happens after?
See, now, even on this issue of INEC, now it's interesting to know that a few days ago, Professor Atahiru Jega, who is the former INEC chairman, came out to say that part of the recommendations is making for a transparent, free and fair electoral process in Nigeria, that the INEC chairman should not be appointed, the current appointment process should not be what should be if we want a truly transparent election. So it tells you a whole lot. It tells you that this man who has been through that shoot
knows what he sees.
Knows what he sees by virtue of that sort of interference in the course of the appointment. And if we are also making projections for what our electoral system should look like, I think just agree with what he has said earlier on the issue of inauguration. I've also been an advocate of the view that we should have an amendment of our electoral laws to the extent that when an election is conducted, before inauguration, the election petitions, if any, should be treated before the time of inauguration, so that someone is not inaugurated, you get into power, you have access to the instruments of government, you have access to governmental power resources that you can thwart anybody if you want to. Let's be realistic. We shouldn't, I won't sit there and begin to sugarcoat anything, because I think to some extent, a little, I have an idea of what it is for somebody to hold power, and then you are in a position to decide what seemingly happens in other institutions of government. So if these things are part of the problems that makes our electoral system to be flawed in some way, then we should be able to take steps to see how, if a person wins, the election petition should be treated in a time frame that once it is done and decided, that is when the person is inaugurated. And then other reforms. I find it very funny and very interesting too, that an election petition that somebody files before the court, INEC, who is the umpire, is the respondent. So the PDP has taken President Bola Ahmed Tinubu to court, challenging his election. He is a respondent. INEC is also a respondent to the election petition. But in that same petition, in terms of proving your cases before the court, evidence that you need to tender, sometimes you need to tender election results. You expect the petitioner to get certified true copies of those documents from INEC. So you are saying that INEC, who you are attacking in court, should give you bullets to go and shoot them in court. Realistically, nobody wants to arm you with ammunition that you use to fight them. So part of the reforms we are looking at is that issues like this should be treated in such a way, even if INEC may be a respondent, there should be some sort of leeway in such a way that the petitioner should have some sort of access to these documents without necessarily relying so much on INEC. I don't know how we are going to get on with that recommendation, but my concern is the fact that you don't bring somebody to a war front that you're fighting against the person, and you're expecting that person should arm you with bullets to use to fight them. I don't think I need to emphasize it so much, but I'm sure the logic is clear to anybody.
What's your own take on that?
Well, let me create a graphic picture to the issue of the inauguration. You see, you appoint, you inaugurate somebody into office, just like the case of Mr. President. He appoints the CGN. The CGN in turn appoints those who will now preside over election matters. So you judge for yourself. I don't have to say more than that.
Okay, now speaking that, I like the fact that you made the analysis, because now that's going to bring me to my next question. What kind of confidence do you think the people would have in the judiciary and the government at this level? Now that you've actually analyzed that, we've said, oh, can these people be independent? But no, they are not independent. They are appointed. The president was inaugurated, then he picked the CGN. The CGN, of course, elects everybody in the electioneering process, and everybody, all the judges. I beg your pardon. So, what confidence do you think the people should have in the judiciary right now?
Mercy, I sincerely, I think that question should go to the barrister. But
I want to hear from
the NJC should purge itself of because a lot of persons are really, they don't have that confidence in the judiciary anymore, and it's quite sad because the judiciary is supposed to be the last hope for the common man. Moving forward, we would like to see them put in place a mechanism that will instill confidence, because if you go to the street right now, they'll tell you, in fact, we don't even have to get to the situation where the judiciary should be the one to determine who becomes the winner of whatever election. All right, it's because the people have suddenly lost confidence in INEC, and now the judiciary, who they are hoping on, they are gradually losing confidence in the judiciary. So something needs to be done urgently. Mercy.
So you are the judiciary, or you are a part of the judiciary. Over to you.
Thank you. Well, issues around confidence that you should have in the judiciary and the government, I'll speak to the confidence in the government on one hand, but on the judiciary first. Just like he said, I think all of these realities boils down to the fact that we need to have serious reformations for as long as our electoral system is concerned. We are talking about the issue of confidence now because the election, the judgment that was given today is one that borders on the electoral system and the laws applicable in that regard. So if we have some of these reforms that will enable the judiciary to function without necessarily seeing that atom of influence from the political office holders, I think that will go a long way to begin to build confidence that people have in the decisions of the Supreme Court. Because, I mean, it's always very rare, very difficult for you to see people come out to tell you that, oh, I believe so much in what the court is going to do, and I believe this, without them making it because of the fact that, but the judges, how were they appointed this? All of these things cast doubt on the confidence that people should necessarily have on the judiciary. So, all I'm simply saying is that we should be able to have reforms in our laws, appointments, and then for electoral issues, of course, we've already advanced the argument that reforms need to be done there too. But all of these reforms will only go to build that confidence in the judiciary, so that in the end, once a decision is given, people know that, okay, this is a decision that you can't in any way trace it to any atom of political interference. But beyond some of these reforms we have talked about too, I think other reforms need to be, we need to have an attitudinal change too towards issues before the court. So it's not all the time that you just sit down and wake up and say, oh, the judiciary is biased, the judiciary is biased. We have to redefine the concept of justice, not just to be in a situation where it favors us. The concept of justice, I don't know, it may be difficult to give it an objective definition. It may be difficult, but I think as human beings we have that atom of rationality in us that we can easily tell when something reflects the better good of the society and not necessarily our individual benefits. So I'm saying this because there are times when we may be tempted to think that the judiciary is not active because seemingly a judgment that is given does not favor us. So we should move beyond the individual expectations to look at, sometimes, I'm not saying all the time, but sometimes we should look at it in terms of how this reflects the general well-being of the society. Now, the confidence when it comes to the side of government, because the question was on two arms, the judiciary and the government. I think government now reflects on those who are saddled with the responsibility to run the government in our country. So there's a judgment that okays the election of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu as the validly elected president of Nigeria. So the expectation now is that, given that judgment, he should be able to perform in a manner that Nigerians will have access to good governance. Because it's quite unfortunate that since they came on board, and of course we naturally want to trace it to the removal of fuel subsidy, not because the policy is bad, but because the manner in which that policy, the removal of fuel subsidy was implemented, was not in such a way that there was a coordinated effort to ensure that all stakeholders are brought to a round table. They discuss a way forward from removal of fuel subsidy. So that atom of allowing those stakeholders carry out their arbitrary decisions because the president has moved, they went to act arbitrarily to fix prices the way they wanted. It tells you that if there was a coordinated effort, government removes and then bring all stakeholders to a round table, set a roadmap, a sustainable roadmap on how the policy will be implemented. It will help cushion the effect of the removal on Nigerians. But the reality today is that, like I said earlier, Nigerians are now living 3 times what they were spending few months ago.
So you were saying few months ago. I'd like to direct the question to you. Some persons have said they are going to assume that we never had 8 years, that it feels like we're 8 years back. Do you agree with that?
Well, given what we've seen, like some persons will say we've seen, I don't want to use the word, but we've seen shaggy. But the truth is, I probably want to speak on attitudinal change. You know, we as citizens, we expect too much from our government on one hand. On the other hand, you see somebody contesting for an election, all you're looking at is not because this guy can deliver, but what you can get from him. You see, these are problems because these guys are not Father Christmas. And those contesting for election, what they are looking at is not because they want to serve, not all of them though, not because he wants to serve, but because there's a national cake out there he wants to get from. And when he gets to that position, what do you expect? Having paid through his nose to get, it tells you that the system itself is not favoring some of this person contesting. So we need to cut down on the tag we put on contesting for election, because you don't expect a man to pay over 100 million just to purchase a form, and that's for just the form now. Talking about campaign and every other thing, he has to pay. Then when he gets there, he must recoup his money. So that's why you see, talking about this SUV thing, they cannot reject it. The only man who came to the Senate and say, oh, our salaries is too much, the guy never came back, Shehu Sani, because he was just a lone voice in the wilderness. Right? So we need to look at these things. Even I can bet you that even these guys who wrote down the popularity of Peter Obi, that's the Labour Party senators, will never say anything as regards we don't want, because there's a saying in local parlors, who you go put honey for a mouth, or you go say no sweet.
That's deep.
You understand? Yeah. So don't expect these guys to tell you that, oh, we don't need it. It will never happen. The Labour Party chairman said, oh, they should reject it, but have you heard of any of them rejecting it? They will never do that.
Now, some persons have said the silence is loud and it speaks.
Yes, what they are saying is a national cake, And in their mindset is like, oh, when you don't reach our turn, you are not telling us to forgo this thing, it will never happen. All right, so we need to have a change of mind. If you see, until when we have professors any more than senators, that is when I think we're on the right path. All right, because for now you see senators far more than professors, and it's not just proper. We should look into it. When you make the constitution, when you make the legislators to be part-time on part-time basis, you pay them on part-time basis. All right, that is when you begin to see people. You make the system very unattractive. That is when you see people don't even bother going there. It's only those who want to serve that will go there. Yeah, that's one of the ways to separate the wheat from the chaff without bias.
All right. Speaking about separating the wheat from the chaff, Justice Okura said failure to transmit result on IREF does not stop collation of results, but then some persons have, of course, they would always bring receipts back as to when this INEC has said they would transmit results in real time. So now, is there like a conflicting thing between INEC and the judiciary? And then said no issue for determination, no issue for determining the appellant point on certificate forgery. I'd like you to take those two questions in a breath.
Thank you. Well, the issue of transmission of election results, INEC saying they will transmit, Supreme Court says, despite their inability to transmit, that the election was valid. Well, those issues boil down to, first, what is the impact of the judgment of the Supreme Court? Yeah, so because as it is now, no matter what each and every one of us may hold as a view in terms of transmission of result, we can't take away the fact that there's a precedent that has been set by the Supreme Court. And that precedent is to the effect that it is not mandatory to transmit result, and that INEC reserves the power to determine what mode they are going to transmit result. So some may want to say, what is the impact it has? The impact it has is to the effect that there's a school of thought in law that believes law is the prophecies of what the judges say and nothing more pretentious. So if you're going by that, and of course, bearing in mind the fact that once the decision is reached by the Supreme Court, it is final, it becomes law. So until that decision is overturned, in future, hopefully, it never happens, or that there is an amendment or electoral law to, of course, make it mandatory that the transmission of results should be done through the IREF or through the electronic system. That decision of the Supreme Court will always act as a law on that issue. So it's quite unfortunate as it may be to some persons, and to other persons it may be fortunate for them. But the reality now is that that is now law. And as Nigerian citizens, we always have to obey those principles as they have been set out until there's an amendment either by the National Assembly or the Supreme Court itself has reasons in future by way of following due process to overturn the judgment it has given today. Now, on the issue of certificate forgery, now the Supreme Court rejected the application for leave to allow the PDP tender new evidence. Like I said earlier on, it's unfortunate to some persons and it may be fortunate to some persons, but the reality now is that that judgment has been given, and of course what the president they've said there is that because he did not bring it at the lower court, that they can't allow it at the Supreme Court, and they had all the time to bring it. But I think if we look at it from a realistic point of view, at the Court of Appeal, they were yet to get those records from the CSU, from the Chicago State University. And so if at this point they had gotten the records and they are now applying to the Supreme Court, pursuant to the relevant rules of the court, Order 2 and Order 2 Rule 2 of the Supreme Court rules, that the court should grant them leave to tender the new evidence. That in itself now raises the question of, would it be justice that given the circumstances we find ourselves, that initially these guys didn't have access to this evidence, but they now have it. Would it be justice for the Supreme Court to consider, grant them leave to tender the evidence so that they will consider the standing of the president of our country? That is the basic question that begs for answer on a side conversation, not necessarily law, because legally speaking, like I said, the decision is final. And until there's an amendment in our laws to accommodate some of these things we may not be comfortable with, that law remains what it is. And if the Supreme Court itself overrules itself when subsequently the same matter comes before it, that will now be a different case. But for now, that is what it is. And that decision is final.
It's final.
Yes.
What's your own take on it, even though that's from the legal perspective?
Well, it has really enriched our judiciary, political jurisprudence, because now politicians now know how to attack issues, because some of the issues they talked about, that of the Labour Party, that they were not specific on where these elections were rigged and the numbers of votes and all that. So it makes politicians to become wiser, because you now know that when next you want to go to court, you know how to approach the court. And on the issue of they didn't bring the result issue for it shows that, okay, now you don't have to wait. If you really have access to this particular information, you use it from day one. All right. So I think it's all good, because at the end of the day, we are all learning.
But do you think PDP had access to this information before and they didn't use it?
Well, I think probably they don't have access to this information all the while. But like he said, I think the judiciary should have considered the fact that, you know, in a case you have to look for everything possible to be able to defeat your opponent, and I think they probably must have been sourcing to get that information. As at the time they get it, I think they should have allowed it. But I spoke with a particular constitutional barrister. He told me that it's almost impossible for the Supreme Court to admit new evidence at this particular time. So I wasn't surprised when I this particular judgment.
Okay, I like something to actually. I want our viewers to, of course, be clear about some things, and I'll throw the questions to both of you. The Tinubu's victory cannot be annulled over non-electronic transmission of election results. That's coming from Supreme Court. That's one question. The second question: the 25% vote in the FCT. Why is it and in the FCT? Because now, I think after the appeal court made it known that you must not necessarily, the FCT does not have a special status. Now that the FCT does not have a special status, why is the and there? That's one. Two, can FCT be said to be a state now? Can we just create the FCT state now that you do not have a special status?
Now, I think there's something we need to get clear on the issue of the FCT and the special status they should enjoy. Okay. Now, before now, we've not had the precedent when it comes to a presidential election voting. So this situation, of course, that was the reason why the former president of the bar, Dr. Ulisa Bakoba, had written at some point to the Supreme Court also that they should visit that, they should look at that issue, because he fears it may happen, and it came up. So now the issue has come up, and the court has ruled that the FCT does not have a special status. Now, the provision of the Constitution under that section 134, section 134, of the Constitution, is that 25% in other states and FCT. Now, what the Supreme Court did in this case, or what the judiciary has done in this case, is to exercise its judicial powers in line with section 6 of the Constitution, which is the interpretation of our laws.
I was going to get to that. Don't you think the judiciary interpreted it to suit their own meaning? Because now we have this, I think we have a case of something similar in, I think, Plateau State. And then some persons have said, the judiciary came out to say, oh, this also matter is pre-election matters, and then the court does not have a say in pre-election matters. Well, in this case, the court has.
So now, you need to understand that there's a difference between pre-election matters and election petition.
I'm talking about the interpretation itself.
Yeah, so the issue of and is not, you can't call it a pre-election matter, because that section 134 envisages votes that you have garnered in the course of election. Of course, when the election is conducted, they've already left the issue of pre-election, because pre-election is at the point of primaries before the election proper. So if the Constitution in this case makes the provision, the issue of FCT and the use of and those ones are purely election petition matters, and so it is right for them to have brought it at this stage. So what the judiciary has done in this case is to simply give a judicial interpretation to the word and what use that word, the use of that word in that particular provision of the Constitution, and they've simply said that the word and does not operate The decision is to the effect that the use of and of course stipulation as to the FCT does not operate to give the FCT a special status. It doesn't. And unlike every other state, the FCT does not have a special status. And on that point, well, let me say that I agree with the Supreme Court, because by saying that the FCT has a special status, it means that special status when it has to do with election petition for presidency. Please get that clear, not for other issues. Now, by saying that the FCT will have a special status will mean that you are saying when other states are done voting, until the FCT decides as a big brother.
That's more like the electoral college in the US.
We can't have a winner. And as a person, that's not an argument I am inclined to. I don't know if you get it, but on the whole, what we need to understand is that what the court has done in this case is that we've not had a precedent on this issue of the FCT and the status when it has to do with presidential election. So the court has taken steps now to interpret the provision of the constitution in order to settle that issue. So moving forward in future too, if we have issues around the FCT 25%, there's not a precedent that we can readily lay our hands.
But what if the next set of judges decide to interpret it in their own way and say the 25% in the FCT does matter? Well,
if the Supreme Court subsequently decides, given the wisdom of the judges, that FCT has a special status, for as long as the decision of the Supreme Court, like I've emphasized there, it becomes the position of the law until there's a judgment from the Supreme Court itself overturning that decision, or an enactment of the National Assembly to amend our laws to provide a position that is totally different from what the court has decided. Until that is done, if the court has given a judgment, that's the Supreme Court in this case, that judgment ought to be obeyed.
Well, from a layman point of view, the word "and" it means FCT should not be treated as a state, but right now they are telling us that it should be treated as a 37th state. So now the lacuna there is this, from a layman point of view. It means that somebody can come tomorrow and take the Nigerian state to court that FCT is not a state, should be given a governor, and every apparatus that the state enjoy. By extension, I don't know if I'm correct, maybe.
That's why I drew a context in this case. I told you that the issue of FCT here is as regards
the presidential
election into the office of the president. That if you look at that provision of the Constitution, section 134, it is clear on election into the office of the president. So it does not relate to other issues. But that's why even on the administration of the FCT, that's why the Constitution makes provision for how the FCT should be run and all of those issues. So, but when it has to do with presidential election, this judgment is as it affects that provision in respect of election into the office of president and the requirement as to the number of votes cast.
So sorry to cut you short. How do you explain a sitting president not winning, not getting 25% votes in a state? I'm using state in a state where he is supposed to be residing. How do you explain that?
Well, like I said, this is away from what the law is, our personal view. And I've admitted here clearly that I hold that view, that it mustn't be a big brother over the votes that come from other places. Now, the reality is what we already have. It's not like it's something that is futuristic. We are already in that situation where the president did not score majority of the votes
in the state he's sitting
in the FCT where Aso Rock is. Is there special damage that the citizens of the FCT will suffer because the president did not win election in the FCT? Are there special benefits they get because the president won election from the FCT? If the government is bad, it's bad for everybody, whether you're in Anambra, you're in Abuja, or you're in Imo. Anywhere you have bad governance reaches, it goes around like a national cake. And good governance will still go around like a national cake. I don't know if you get it. So it's not necessarily that you give a special status and then there's seemingly that benefit that comes from, in terms of good governance, that you enjoy because
Okay, all right. I'd like us to quickly wrap up, but then I'm going to throw these questions to both of you, but I'd like Ejuru to answer first. INEC came out yesterday to say they have issues with printing of the ballot papers because most parties, they've printed out their ballot papers with certain parties and their party candidates on it, and now some parties are still suffering from pre-election matters. Let's use that word because they cannot even decide who is going to represent the party. And now, before you came to the studio, we were reading about Bayelsa State, where they didn't, of course, include the APC. This thing. What do you think this means for APC as a whole? That's one. Then two, do you think INEC is actually prepared enough for these next 3 elections coming up, come next month? That's Kogi, Bayelsa, and Imo State.
Well, let me start with the Bayelsa issue. It means litigation. All right, so INEC should get ready.
Okay.
You know, because a whole lot of persons will go to court. At the end of the day, don't be surprised. It is the court that will determine who becomes the winner of this election. And then INEC should talk less, because that is one of the problems we suffered during the 2023 election. The chairman of INEC came out to say a whole lot. That is why even people were holding him to what he said.
But nobody cared to talk about the constitution.
Yes, because so they should talk less. If you want to engage people, look for a way to engage them. You know, use there are so many medium you could use without using your front line man. That's the chairman now to do some of this talking, because when you say too many things, people will hold you to one of those things you didn't do. Okay, so they should be prepared. Yes, you've printed these persons and the ballots, or go ahead with the election. At the end of the day, I bet you our normal style, it ends in court. It will end in court.
Go to court.
Go to court.
All right.
And my barrister friend here, they seems to be the beneficiary of this whole thing going to court.
It's not necessarily about being a beneficiary. I think from what he has said, that in itself exposes us to some of the issues we have always advocated for. The fact that politicians now do what they want to do and hope that it will end in the court. So that in itself tells a very bad story about our electoral system. It tells you that anything goes at the electioneering ground where the election happens, but it must go and end in the judiciary. And some of these things are there because they have the confidence that after when I win, I will be inaugurated before this is in court. So all these issues are somehow interwoven. So if we have a system where, in terms of INEC carrying out their duties, they carry out those duties effectively, so in such a way that people have that confidence that the results that will come out from the electoral process is seemingly free and fair, even if some of us believe that it may be very difficult in most instances to get a free and fair election. But let's take steps to see how we can make our electoral process more transparent. All these issues around IREF, no IREF, tells you a whole lot about the confidence people have in INEC. Because like he said, when you come out to say something, as an agency that is built on trust and confidence that people have in your ability to deliver a free and fair process, and then it turns out that you are no longer doing that thing you said you are going to do, that in itself casts serious doubt on you. It's not, this time it's not about law and what the law says about it. It's about the confidence you have built for yourself and the fact that you've gone below expectations from people. People do not need to go and know what your powers are or what your powers are not to be able to look at you and begin to look at you as somebody who is very cunning and that you're not straightforward in the way you're acting. So these are some of the realities that INEC should be able to take into consideration when they're acting. You do electronic transmission of result. There's absolutely no reason why, because the Electoral Act gives you powers to determine the mode of transmission. You said you go electronic, then in the field you are now doing manual. Those realities will make people naturally lose interest in the electioneering process. So this time is not about the court per se, but it's about what the system that conducts election is all about. And if we can have a system where our laws are specific and they are mandatory in their words when it comes to doing certain things, it will go a long way to also boost the confidence of the people in our electoral system.
Speaking about confidence in the electoral process, do you think this would actually affect the Imo State, the Kogi State and the Imo State election when it comes to having a credible election come next month?
Well, the thing is that the decision of the Supreme Court today has set the ball rolling for some of the realities we may see in the Imo Bayelsa election. Because if the Supreme Court has ruled on the issue of transmission of results, it necessarily follows that even if INEC comes down to say they will do electronic transmission and they end up not doing it, they will have a justification tomorrow when the matter goes to court to say this, and they won't be telling you we said we're going to do and this is the reason why we didn't do. They won't even give you any explanation. They just simply tell you that there's a decision of the Supreme Court to the effect that we have the power to determine the mode of transmission, and if we did not go by electronic means that we promised you, please
just take it that way.
Take it that way.
Do you think we should have a body that would actually hold these persons responsible for things, or it feels like nobody is even accountable again? Because speaking from what you said now, it looks like there's going to be lots of voter apathy in the next election. But then, do we have bodies that would actually hold these people responsible and say, oh, you did something wrong, irrespective of the constitution? That's one. Then two, some persons have said the 1999 constitution needs to be amended, that it's not for us. I'd like you to take this in 2 minutes.
Well, obviously, the constitution needs to be amended because there's a whole lot. You know, the part that say we the people. I can't remember when we the people sat down to arrive at that constitution. So I think we need to sit down and look at some of these gray areas that need to be amended, because we can't continue like this, obviously. And for the voters' apathy, obviously, a lot of persons are really not happy with what is going on. So some persons consider it as a waste of time to go out and vote. But I would like to encourage them that it's not a waste of time. If you stay away, you're giving the crooked politicians, those who are crooked, who have ulterior motive, you are giving them the chance to become to make decisions over you. All right. So because you don't have to sit back and say, oh, well, after all, my vote will not count. I bet you, if we all come out to vote, it will be difficult for any politicians to manipulate that vote. Okay.
Your own take on whether the 1999 constitution should be amended, as we wrap up in 1 minute.
Thank you. Well, before, in the spirit of advocating that the constitution should be amended, I think beyond amendment, institutions of government must be able to live up to expectations. Because why it looks like the constitution does not work in some instances now is that you have so much of executive rascality going on, but there's no National Assembly to call the executive members to order. Now that we have a National Assembly that is buying SUVs when the country is not working. So some of these realities tells you that it's not even a constitutional problem per se, but it's the attitude of those who are in the position to make things happen, and they're not making those things happen. Of course, the angles and areas in the constitution that needs some sort of reforms. But as we advocate for those reforms to happen, let's also have persons who are responsible in leadership, persons who should be responsible for setting the law in motion. As we always say, the law is made for man and not the people for the law. So when you make a law, it takes a human instrumentality to set that law in motion. So even if you amend the constitution and then we still have a National Assembly that is docile and they can't sit up when the situation demands their action, we will still begin to cry again that the constitution should be amended. So, you know, let's have a system that works and everybody lives up to expectations. Okay, right. As we round up, I'd like you to leave a note with our viewers at home as to what to expect or what they should do. I would like to encourage everybody to be at peace with yourself. You've done your bit by going out to vote. If the judgment didn't go your way, that's not the last. We still have another election coming. Those of you who have not registered, you are part of the problem. Go and register so that you can vote in the next coming election. Thank you. All right, over to you now. Leave note with the people. Thank you. Of course, the problem may not reflect the expectations of all Nigerians, but the reality is that the judgment has given judicial stamp to a government to operate. So it is now the responsibility of Nigerians to stand up and ensure that those who are in power are held accountable. And so we should not just sit down and cry that things are not working. We should get involved and play our role as citizens of this country to hold those who are holding offices accountable so that they make the place much more conducive for everyone. Okay, all right, then that's what we'll take today. Thank you so much for joining us today on the program, and of course, thank you to Edro Nwata and Tava Agbo for joining us today on Polity. It's been an insightful one with you guys today. One thing I'll hold on to from this program is we need people that are responsible
in leadership. And that's where I'll leave it for today on the Polity. Thank you for joining us and our viewers at home. Thank you to our backstage guys, the MCR, and of course our producer for today. I remain Messi Babajide. See you same time, same station tomorrow. Bye.